Boom. Okay, everybody, welcome to Web Extended. So, real quick before we get into this, I know you don't have a ton of time left, so I don't want to take it off. I do want to ask you about photography, though, because that was one of the things that got me interested in you a while back when I first started following you. Because I've taken some photography classes in college. I'm not a professional by any means, but I'm very interested in the subject. So I did want to ask you real quick about that. How did you get into that, and what was that kind of like?
Yeah, that story is actually pretty interesting because I didn't grow up in being interested in photography. A lot of photographers that I know of, or at least I don't know if that's actually true. Maybe it's just what it seemed, is that there was a lot of people who were interested in photography from a young age as I was growing up. But that didn't apply to me. That's the
Right.
point, is that it didn't apply to me. And what got me into photography was actually right after I got married to my wife in 2011. She noticed this earlier, so let me back up a second. So when we started dating, we went out to, in group setting, we went out to Red Robin, I think was the restaurant, with a bunch of friends from church. And so she had a little point and shoot camera, one of those old school, like, little Sony little boxes so anyways, I took a picture of a bowl of lemons that was on the table. We were sitting across from each other, flirting, and I took a picture of this bowl of lemons, and I showed it to her, and she was like, "This is really good." And I was like, "Whatever." And so that's basically how it started. She sort of noticed that I had a sort of natural talent for it. And then eventually, after we got married, she kind of pushed me along, and I got a nice little professional camera, and I hooked up with the uh, photographer that did our wedding. And so I went out with her and did like a little session with some bride that she photographed from some previous, I think. Anyway, so I took some pictures with her, and I got into it a little bit deeper, and hooked up with another person. And so that sort of just kept growing and growing and growing. So I started out in doing weddings, shooting weddings, and then I started to do family shoots. And I always have to think about the fact that using this terminology of like shoot, or like a shoot, or shooting someone, like, in the photography world, that no one blinks an eye.
Right.
But when you get out of it and you start to use that terminology, everyone's like, "What are you talking about? You're not shooting anyone." So in the photography world, like, that's the terminology that we use all
Right.
the time. It's like everything is a shoot, and we're always shooting somebody.
Yeah.
Uh, but anyways, so I got into doing photography for weddings and family shoots, and eventually I got a job as a photo editor at this company, and I worked my way up to the photography position there. And so I was a full-time photographer for a few years until I was laid off back in October of 2019 because the company was not doing well. So that's the backstory of my photography stuff. So I do have a passion for it. I still like doing it, and I take professional portraits of pretty much all the apologists that I interview on my channel. And eventually I want to put that into a book and showcase their work and the portraits that I've taken of them. So, so yeah, that's a little backstory about my all my photography background.
Yeah, and very cool. And I don't know if you're also a Molinist. I'm a Molinist, so I hear that story. Might people think, oh, you got laid off? It's like, yeah, but I think you're doing great work for the kingdom with your apologetics ministry, and of course the photography talent just carries so well that people can see it right now. The contrast between your picture and my picture, everything looks so great. Your lighting is always great. I love when you post face on photos with quotes in text written over them on Facebook. I think it's absolutely great. So on a Mullen's
Yeah,
perspective,
I
it
appreciate that.
seemed to work out perfect. Um, so real quick, I do want to just, and not like we're arguing or we're fighting here, because when I first heard, say, this is, we're talking months ago when I saw
We're
you.
about to fight. For real. Let's
Okay,
be for
okay.
real.
I saw you posted something about like, what's your favorite argument? I think the best one is the contingency argument. I'm thinking, well, the best one's the moral argument. And one of the things I say that, by the way, like I know William and Craig says the moral argument's the most compelling because it strikes people emotionally. I don't think that. I think on intellectual reasons, I think it's the best. Now, granted, as I've been studying the contingency argument over the past couple months, I'm like, yeah, this might be a lot better than the moral argument. But for the sake of just having a kind of back and forth here, the reason I think the moral argument is superior is because now I think that some of the best arguments are probably, I think, contingency, moral, free will, and consciousness. And the reason I think those four are the best is because these are immediate realities that you can't deny. You can't deny that there's an external world. You could, but it's like you don't get anywhere from that. You can't deny your own consciousness. You can't deny you have free will. You can't deny objective morality. Now, of course, people do all the time, but I think those are all ultimately have to be self-defeating. Rejecting consciousness is obviously self-defeating, right? And so I think all of them fall into that. These are immediate realities. Whereas things like the Kalam isn't an immediate reality. If you posit a B theory of time, that falls apart. Or fine-tuning, if you posit chance, that's not an immediate reality that things aren't necessarily designed. So on that hierarchy, I put the moral argument at the top only because I think it's so obvious. Once you have objective morality as an immediate reality, it has to be grounded in a person, because morality is only a property of persons, not things. And so I think that's the easiest route to God, whereas if you start with contingency, even though contingent reality around you is an immediate experience, it does take a lot more intellectual work to get to a necessary foundation. And then there's all the objections that, even though I think they ultimately fail, they're still the ones we discussed earlier. But anyway, that's my small spiel about it to start with.
Yeah. So I think I'll give some of my reasons to think that the argument from contingency is the best one. And so the first one is that other cosmological arguments, like the Kalam, and we probably agree here, like the Kalam requires some additional steps, like arguing that the universe began to exist. But the argument from contingency doesn't require that, so it's a little bit more modest. So the modesty of the contingency argument is something that I really like. And so the second reason is that it doesn't just get us a generic creator of the universe. It doesn't even just get us like a good being, like what the moral argument does. It just gets us like a morally perfect being. But the argument from contingency gets us all the way to the classical conception of God, all powerful, all knowing, all good, and metaphysically necessary. So that's probably the best reason that I like the argument from contingency, is that it gets us all the way there. So that this argument by itself we can use to establish that God exists, and we can do it just by the light of reason. And one of the things that you pointed out with the moral argument is that it's so obvious. Like, our moral experience makes it obviously the case to us that there is objective morality. I would say that in the same way, it's just obvious that there are contingent things in the world. And the first thing you can use to establish that is your own thoughts, your own consciousness. So you haven't been here forever. You haven't always been around. Like, you haven't been in here, you weren't alive during the Jurassic period. And unless you think you're going to exist forever, at least in this state, then you're going to agree that you were not always here. You're not always going to be here. And so you are contingent. So I think that in the same way that moral experience is obvious, I think it's obvious that there are contingent things, which the rest of the argument follows. So another thing to say in response to your reasons for thinking that the moral argument is the best is that you said that the only way that we can ground moral facts is in a person, but that's sort of what you'd have to argue in doing the moral argument, is you'd have to argue that the only way to do that is through a person, because a lot of naturalists like Eric Wielenberg have argued that atheistic moral Platonism can do the same job. So I guess that's the response that I would say there, is that so if your objection that the contingency argument requires more steps, I would just say, well, the moral argument requires more steps, and it doesn't get you all the way to the classical conception of God.
Well, boom, I'm persuaded. I was already mostly persuaded, but I wanted to do this anyway, and no, that is great. And it's funny because you kind of touched on everything there when you're talking about our own consciousness is contingent, and of course you have to have free will to be able to assess these arguments. So I think those four that I kind of at the last minute put together: contingency, consciousness, free will, morality. That might be a little something I'll work on in the future, kind of combining those four to make a really robust case. But you did forget one thing, Cam Fam. You said that my soul didn't exist in the Jurassic period, but what about reincarnation? I think the pantheists just refuted us. We're done. We're out of business. I thank you so much for being here, sir. We're going to go out of business.
Shut down the channel.
Yeah, shut down our channel. The pantheists, the Buddhists beat us. We can't come back from that reincarnation. You know, they say that we're kind of going out on a ledge trusting the old New Testament writers, but they've got actual eyewitnesses who can say they've been reincarnated. So I don't think we have any good refutation to that. So anyway, until next time, Cam Fam, I really do appreciate you taking the time. We're 2 minutes over, so I really appreciate it. I can't thank you enough, and hopefully we'll be able to do some more in the future.
All right, yeah, thanks for having me on.